Carrie, as I said, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
We have so much to talk to. I think you're honestly, you're one of the most talented actors working today. I can't wait to just get your thoughts on acting and screen work. But first, I do want to ask how your Blu-ray collection is coming along. How's it shaping up?
We are well over 10,000.
I love to hear it.
My husband had started to, I don't know which imprint it is, but he started to say, just send me any new stuff you make, basically. And then one of them actually created a subscription box where you
Oh,
basically are doing just that. So I think he's inspiring some new structures and maybe single-handedly keeping some of them going. So,
well,
but
we
it's
need
an
it.
extraordinary collection, absolutely extraordinary.
What's the last, great piece of physical media you experienced?
Oh my gosh, we just watched, what did we watch the other day? Oh my gosh, I have to look at my Twitter. I mean, my ex, my
Whoa,
Boots guy.
careful.
Saint Jack by Peter Bogdanovich.
Nice. Very nice.
That was a new, I think that was a new release on, oh no, maybe it wasn't a new release on it. But anyway, that was our last one we watched. We also watched this wild, like Czech movie, another Czech movie from the 1960s, because they're Czech new wave, fascist parables. They were all really terrifying. So we watched one of those this week
Perfect.
too. Apropos of nothing.
Yeah, just for fun, I guess.
Fun.
I'm surprised you're not on Letterboxd. Keeping
Somebody else is on Letterboxd for me. They picked up on my Twitter, and so somebody started posting on Letterboxd. And also, I don't really have a lot of time with two kids to give my opinion
yeah,
on
yeah.
movies, so I feel like the Letterboxd would be sort of unsatisfying. So for now, someone's tracking it. We always post our physical media picture at the end of the year,
Love
which is
that.
like a bar graph of what we've watched. So, but there's always a lot of streaming because of the Academy,
hmm
because we're
hmm
voters, and so we try to be responsible, and we watch all the foreign films. So.
Well, we all appreciate the love for physical media, keeping it going
Well,
because
I love it. I make fun of him because he is insane, but it's an incredible collection, and there's stuff you can't get, and you'll never get ever again.
absolutely. So, as I said, let's talk about you a little bit. You are one of my favorite actors, and I want to sort of, as a way of getting into your process, which is always such a murky thing, I want to use his three daughters as an example, sort of talk through some moments and see how you got there and then on all that fun stuff. I guess the best place to start is, in this film, literally starts on a shot of you, and it's almost like a high-tech self-tape setup. It is just
Yeah.
you against a wall, and it is just an opening sprint, breathless, sort of
Yep.
nonstop, where you're sort of talking at Natasha's character,
Mhm.
Rachel. So I guess, to start, you get a chunk of dialogue like that in a script. How do you sort of approach it? And then
Mhm.
what's the difference between the way you're approaching it and the way you're delivering it on the
Mhm.
day?
Well, of course, the number one thing is to memorize it really
Yeah.
well and be prepared. I have less time for that now. My kids are 6 and 3. It's very hard to prepare the way I would like to prepare now. So I have tended to become, I'm more of an auditory learner now. I used to have one of those minds, you look at the
hmm
page and you have it memorized and you can tell somebody what page number it is. And as you get older, that absolutely goes away. And so I've been taking to line learner. So I can do line learner when I'm doing laundry, after I've driven the kids to school, washing dishes. And so that's kind of the way I've been learning my lines now. So learning it really solidly. And then that way you can kind of let go when you're there. And as you pointed out, the delivery was really pretty breathless, and that's what Ozzy was asking for. Because of course, the I think the really intelligent structure of the movie is that you meet them at their most stereotypical because that's the way they're seeing each other. And then the film complicates that relationship and it's also complicating the audience's relationship to those women. So it's quite structurally sound. And so I understood the assignment. So even though it's not the most hyper realistic delivery of that speech, but it is the delivery that is being required by the structure of that movie. And as a playwright's wife and as a theater actor, I always respect punctuation. And so I tried to be very conscious about making sure I was honoring what was a period and what was a comma. And the rhythm of the piece was something Aza really drove home during the couple of days of rehearsal we had. I think the reason he thought of us for those parts was mostly rhythmic. It's not necessarily a reflection of our personalities, though I can be very controlling with my siblings. I have good cause because I'm very successful. But yeah, it's mostly he heard our voices almost like an orchestra.
I'm interested in the sort of you mentioned the punctuation and the delivery and especially you mentioned that it's not the most naturalistic way to go about it, and that's not always you don't always want the most naturalistic way to go about it. So I'm curious how you get to that place, because I think a lot of people they read something and they're like, or something you hear a lot is that's not how people talk, or or
Right.
you'll hear, that's not how somebody would say that, but that's not what's needed. So how do you get to the place where you're like, okay, here's how it maybe should be said, and here's how it will be said, and here's what works for both character and
I think
dialogue.
for me, it was just it's respect for the role you're playing. I was there to support the film that Ozza wanted to make, a film that was very clearly laid out in the script. The way he was going to shoot that scene was absolutely clear from the beginning. And my job is to bring forth that vision that he has. It's not to impose my idea of what it should be or what I think it should be. And just by virtue of the fact that Natasha and Lizzie and I all signed up for this script, we all understood that assignment. And so I guess what it comes down to is really trusting your director. And what's great about somebody like Ozza is that what you understand is that nothing you're doing is arbitrary. No decision he's making is arbitrary. And in fact, some of those decisions have already been made. And what's really lovely about Ozza is he would always say that we always think faster than him, and he would say, "Slow down, you know, I'm not as fast as you, but I promise you, I will have an answer." And I really respect that. I really respect him honoring his own thought process in the onslaught of these three these three very, we could be very talkative and we ask a lot of questions, we're inquisitive women. It's a lot of energy in a room. But he was really good at managing us, I would say.
I'm curious. You mentioned you had a little bit of time to rehearse. You're somebody who comes from the theater. You've been through all kinds of rehearsals. So I'm always curious when it comes to something like rehearsing for a film where you want to surprise yourself on the day and you
Yeah.
want to give the editor a couple choices and all that stuff. So what is the goal for you of rehearsal? Like if it's not to be note perfect, what are you trying to work out during a rehearsal period?
Well, when you're playing sisters, the immediate thought I have is, of course, you're creating intimacy. We all know that's the job, right? Our job is to create intimacy. That's, we have to jump into these situations and get really familiar with each other right away. Not everybody works that way. It's possible to act it and not engage with your other actors in that manner, but we all chose to show up and be very vulnerable to each other and be really open with each other because we understood we only had 17 days to shoot this film where we were playing sisters. So that's the first job, I think, is to start to understand maybe the way the other actors work and how your process fits in with their process. And ideally, when things are cast well and everybody's on board with the vision of the filmmaker, that's all pretty organic and seamless. And again, understanding that we had a limited amount of time and that preparation was going to be the thing that made sure we could make this film in 17 days. So we were all really well prepared, or as prepared as you can be when you're the mother of two, as I
Yeah,
know about all the time.
because say
Um,
that's an important thing to fit into your schedule as well.
yeah. Um, yeah, and just like getting to know each other. And of course, the other thing we knew is that Ozza had promised is that we were going to shoot in order, which we never do anymore. And coming from the theater, I understand absolutely the benefit of learning through that process. My computer's about to die. um, and so what was brilliant about after, from the rehearsal, the first day is the first day. And so the second day, the scenes you're doing are reckoning with whatever that first day was. And we were actually living through that experience. And that is invaluable and very rare.
To hear you say that, I'm curious. We talk to a lot of people, and a thing that comes up a lot is the process of getting on another actor's wavelength because you sort of have to fit in your specific thing with their specific thing. What is the difference between or the difference in importance between getting to know your co-stars as an actor versus getting to know them as a person? Like which one is sort of more helpful, or does that depend on like what the project is asking of you?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that distinction, but of course they can be different. The person you're getting to know could be very different than the actor you're working with on set. Um, their personality may not be reflective of what their process ultimately is, I suppose. I bet there are many different ideas about this. I happen to be a middle child, and I happen to be, a recovering people pleaser, and not always benevolent shapeshifter. And so I think my inclination might be to accommodate too much, to maybe to the detriment of my own process, such as it is, um, and try to adapt myself to the other people. How successful that is, I guess I don't think I have the perspective to say, but I do pride myself on being someone who is adaptable and easy to work with for directors or other actors. I mean, my primary goal, hopefully, is always that what I would like somebody to walk away from a project and say is that I'm a better actor because I was in a scene with that person. That's what I want. That's what the hope is. It's not always the case, you can't be good every day. But like you learn from the theater that the idea is to like lift everybody up, at least in the Chicago theater. I think there's a bit of a survival instinct in a place like New York where
Mm.
actually part of the goal is to stand out so you can get
Yeah.
another job. But in Chicago, the ensemble ethic really does dominate, I think. And it still is about like the story is the thing. Um, and so I guess if I'm adapting in any way, it's always in service of that, the storytelling. And then hopefully you're not encountering someone who's maybe not listening, or is challenging in some way. I've had very few experiences like that. I don't want to imply anything other, but and then you do kind of have to look out for yourself in that scene, don't you? But that's case by case.
Yeah. I guess that's the thing with a long busy career is it depends. It's you're working with a lot of people and especially with acting, that's a lot of different energies and a lot of different
That's
things to
right.
fit together.
And I know that the most fun is when the scene is happening, in the middle, right?
Absolutely.
Happening between you and not on one side or the other.
Absolutely. I do want to talk a little bit. It's something we mentioned is the breathlessness of the performance because it's such a big part of the character. For the first half before there's a turn. She's talking at people and it's getting out as many words as possible. I'm always so interested in delivery because that's a delivery that your character is not controlling, but you as an actor are controlling.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by the process of getting to that place. Making an uncontrollable character quirk look real on screen, but you're controlling it as the actor. Does that make sense? Does that make
Yeah,
sense to
it
you?
does. It does make sense. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I find that maybe those are this is where I think technique becomes really important.
Hmm.
If you can't move your mouth fast, then you can't execute that note, right? And there is something really technical about what is being called for in that moment. Actually being able to wrap your mouth around those words and say them quickly. I've had a lot of practice of that on the Gilded Age. It's a real trick of the
Yeah.
Gilded Age to kind of, move through some of those speeches fast, especially when they're reiterating something, which that work that tends to do because that's part of the style of it and part of Julian's, understanding of his audience and what they're looking for. So I find that technical stuff is really important. And understanding your own habits, whether they're vocal tics, physical tics, which is why I think it's important to watch yourself. And yes, sometimes to warm up. I mean, maybe that's uncool now, but coming from the theater where sometimes you had to fill an 1,100 seat house or you have to make something feel intimate, but everybody still needs to hear it. Those are technical skills. And I feel that a lot of young actors, because there isn't as much regional theater or for whatever reason, I don't know that they're learning those skills in the same way. You know, there are lessons you learn in the theater, repeating a performance 8 times a week, right? And making it feel like the first time. Some of that's super technical because it's not there for you all the time. But the important thing is not that you cry, it's that they cry. Now, film can see that inauthenticity in a way that you can't, that you can hide it in the theater in a different way than you can hide it on film, because it's just there it is. It's in your eyes. So just feel like having that technique is important. And I think for some people, it's a real turnoff. I think especially if they're actors and they're watching that, they go, well, that feels like technique to me. Maybe it does. It was the best I could do on the day, to execute what I was being asked. But it's good to have the capacity to do it. And that's why I think it's important to watch yourself. I think if you're not willing to watch your work because you're too self-conscious, I mean, I've got bad news. You're going to get old and die anyway. So you might as well get over it now, practice.
Yes.
And, if you can't identify what those automatic choices are that you default to, then you can't make other choices.
You mentioned, the something about it's not about whether you can cry, it's whether about they can cry. I wanted to bring up another moment in this film that really that moved me very greatly is your character saying to her sister, Natasha's character, you know, apologizing, saying, I'm sorry I wasn't there more, you know, to help you. And it's a moment where you do cry, and it's one of those very moving film cries that feels like something came out unintentionally. You know,
Yeah.
so that's another thing that I always with actors I'm interested in talking about, you know, the making a involuntary bodily thing look
Mhm.
real because you have to do it for a couple takes. So I,
Yeah.
you know, and I think another thing that is huge with the Backstage audience, we get it, we see what the Google searches are, and a lot of them is how to cry, how to
Yeah.
cry on
Yeah,
command.
right. Right.
So yeah, we'll start there and sort of, you know, what's your experience with crying
Uh-huh.
on camera, and how has it evolved into what it is now?
Yeah, interesting. I've had to cry a lot because I'm a woman. I get asked to cry a lot. And The Leftovers had a lot of crying.
Yeah, I was gonna say The Leftovers was
Yeah, a lot of crying. Um, Here's what I'll say. Well, again, I come back to the fact that we shot this particular film in order. So that moment occurs near the end of our shoot,
hmm
which which is also then the end of the experience we're all having together. And because I really love Natasha and Lizzie, I really came to love them in the course of that process. And so I was really preparing to say goodbye to Natasha. She's got a very busy life. I don't know if you've noticed, but she's a bit at the apex of her career right now. And so she's real busy. And I know I said that
we had
really very,
Natasha on
oh,
our podcast, and she literally came in
and just talked.
like a wonderful tornado and then left, and we were like, wow.
Extraordinary experience to be in
Yeah.
her presence. And I'll tell you what, it's what's even more extraordinary is to be in the presence of her stillness, which
Yeah.
people don't get to see. And I had the great privilege of being with Natasha at her most vulnerable because of what she's delivering in that film. And if you're open to that, to the actual person who's in front of you, it's moving. So her, because Natasha is relentlessly in pursuit of the truth, as much as she's performing a self, her actual goal is the most truth she can obtain. And so when she's given the opportunity, I mean, when she's asked to do that. So I got to sit inside of my deep appreciation for Natasha. And then also you're marrying that with your compassion for the person you're playing. I mean, Katie's so stunted. Her apologies have been so inadequate. She actually says, but he was our dad. You had a dad. I mean, that is the most childish thing a grown woman could say to her sister. And so if you have compassion for the person you're playing, and you're not judging them, and then you're open to the actual experience of the person who's in front of you, you can you are then maybe emotionally available to whatever might happen. Because you're right, it is a physiological phenomenon that is spontaneous. And when you're doing a play, your body actually builds those guideposts, right? Your body actually knows when it's time to cry when you're doing a play for a certain amount of time. Like there's kind of triggers that start to happen, right? Like your body responds physiologically to the triggers in the play. I think that's a really interesting phenomenon. And then when it doesn't, you better have the technique to back it up, right? On a day when it's not working. So, but as far as like things like The Leftovers, and big moments like that where I'm crying on camera. The thing I discovered during that process, honestly, the one thing I think about more than anything else on a day like that is death. And I'm not kidding. Sometimes if I'm getting self-conscious, right, there's a pressure that comes with an emotional scene. You have to deliver that thing when somebody says action. And you often, because it's a filming day, who knows what you had for lunch? Maybe the catering is bad. Maybe you didn't get much sleep. Maybe you've been up since 3 in the morning because you're a girl and you have to go through hair and makeup really early. There are a lot of factors you can't control. So there feels like a lot of pressure mounting on a day when you know you're delivering a big cry. Inevitably, those days are not the hardest days. It's usually something weird you didn't know was going to be hard that's hard. But anyway, I always found that if I was able to stop and really look at around the room at the crew who's not really looking at you because they have jobs to do, and I think to myself, like, that person was a baby. That person was a baby and they were born and they grew up. It's not a long thing. I'm not talking about some long involved process. You just say all these people were babies. And now here they are and on this day doing their best or whatever. And then someday maybe not too distant from now, they will all be gone. And I will also be gone. And there's something so real and truthful and vulnerable about that that kind of makes all the other shit drop away for me. Like this moment is will never happen again. And I never ever fail to be moved by that. If you really take in how extraordinary it is that you're all in this moment at all, it maybe sounds corny or sounds like a trick, but I think the work is to like really, really, can you really sit with that, your mortality or whatever? And then usually there's a path from that into the thing that you have to do.
That's fascinating because it kind of, it echoes the whole thing of one of the most important parts about acting being present. And I think, you mentioned it, on a film set, there's so much to make you not feel present. And so
Yeah.
to lean into it and be like, oh, all of these people here is a miracle. The camera being there is incredible. It's not so much being distracted by it. It's accepting the miracle of everyone being there and using that. That's I've never thought or heard
It,
anybody describe it
it
like that.
occurs to me, somebody was telling the story about Holly Hunter on the set of broadcast news.
I love
Right.
that.
I think maybe it was Leslie Bibb. Maybe it was Leslie talking about it down in Thailand. But she always tells a story like she has to cry. Holly's someone who's always so alive in the moment. She's terrifying in that way. Like you think she could strangle you. You don't know what she's going to do. And it's electrifying as an actor. And it's really intimidating because she's Holly Hunter and she's incredible. And she tells a story about how she goes, it had been a long day and how she's taking in the circumstances of what's happening to her in that room as the actor in that room. And she said that, she goes, I don't know, catering brought out some crab rangoon and I just burst into tears. It's like the crab rangoon from catering can be enough if you're open to like what's actually going on.
I love that. That's incredible. I do want to ask, sort of generally, we had you on the cover of Backstage in 2017.
Oh
It's
my God.
7 years ago. So of course I revisited. I was like, oh, so, and the very first quote from you in that piece is something about, to be an actor is to be a work in progress.
Mhm.
And I thought it was interesting to revisit that 7 years later. Like in what ways between you saying that to us in 2017 and now, how do you think you have most, added to being a work in progress as an actor?
I think what the benefit of getting older in any job probably, and as a woman in particular, for me, started when I was 30. When you start to deeply understand how little anyone else is actually thinking about you, and when that self-consciousness drops away, that's when things get really exciting. Because if you don't care, the biggest mistake we make on a set is trying to be pleasing and guessing what people want, or in an audition, when actually the most exciting people are actually not really worrying about that. They're not worried about making a mistake. You make a mistake, and you're like, that was not it. I was just saying, I just did a SAG Q&A, and I had read an interview with Vicky Krieps, the German actress,
Yeah.
who was talking about how she says, when I start out to do a scene, I think, how wrong can I go? And I just love that because it's like if I can get really far away from it and just feel how that's not it, and then it's just the act of kind of like experimenting and getting closer and circling it. But while you're circling it, you've tried all these things before you get to the moment. Now, do we always have time to do that? No, probably not. But we can sure take a big swing and learn. And just like being willing to be bad, I think is really important. And I think as I've gotten older and being a work in progress, that's, along with the fact that when your life feels like your life. I mean, my life fell into place. I found my partner who will be my partner forever, presumably. I have my children, which is, I have found it to be a very deeply creative act. And I really like being a mother, which has been clarifying, but all like how I make decisions about what work I'll do, that's become very stark for me. But like, there's a lot to be, there's a lot to be gained and inside of that mess that is motherhood. I mean, I've just learned a lot from my kids. And so I guess now I'm a woman, now I'm a person who's trying to balance what it's like to try to be a mom and be an artist. And it's really hard. It's a really hard thing. So that's kind of, but my psychological health is better than it's ever been. I'm a more wholly integrated person. And I really just don't, if I may say, just don't give a fuck what anybody thinks, you know? And that's liberating.
Love that. And I hope I get to ask you the same question 7 years down the
Oh,
road.
let's keep revisiting this question.
Absolutely. As long as we're sort of, touching a little bit on reflection a little bit and growing, I couldn't help but, watching his three daughters and watching you and Elizabeth Olsen
Yeah.
interact, thinking about the last time I saw you together
Uh-huh.
on screen, you were voicing a character called Proxima Midnight and she was the Scarlet
Yeah.
Witch. And, it couldn't have been a more different project, but that I
Yeah.
find that so interesting. And
And we
I'm
never
just
met.
exactly, yeah. So I'm just curious, as an actor, are you ever someone who has, reflects on not just the work you've done, but like the sheer breadth of it. Like seeing you in that movie, and it's just something. Have you ever sort of looked at your IMDb page in that way and been like, wow, look at the variety here.
Um, I am if I do stop and take a moment. I mean, the word I think that moment is gratitude, right? I recognize that the career I have, I think 90% of actors would probably trade places with me. And that is gosh, I wish there was enough work for all of us, you know? But I mean moments like being on set with the Ghostbusters while they're saying goodbye to Harold Ramis and in on film. I mean, I can't actually wrap my head around those moments. They just feel they still feel very abstract, even though they happen to me, or what they signify in this in business. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around what they mean. Um, but I do sit back and try and recognize that it's been a hell of a life, you know? And so far they haven't kicked me out. And so far they keep saying, "Yeah, okay, how about this?" And I feel really fortunate. And I recognize that my path, which has actually been quite steady and workmanlike with not a lot of gaps, is unusual. I haven't had some of those struggles of like long unemployment, and I don't know why. Um, I don't credit myself with it. It's just really the luck of opportunity. I think I've stayed open-minded about what those opportunities look like, and maybe that has helped, but I can't take credit for that stuff. You're only as good as your opportunities. And there are a number of women who could have gotten that part in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf out of Chicago, and been on a very different path. And it just so happened that day it was me. So I'm humbled by it. And I don't mean that in a false way. I mean, I really am. My family is still pretty flummoxed by the idea of who I am in the world. I mean, I tell you, no one recognizes me. It's so rare that I'm anywhere. I walk through the world completely unmolested. So anything that's happening relative to like fame or notoriety is happening on the internet and very far from me. So I don't have to reckon with it. I'm not a celebrity, you know? I'm an actor. Like no one's bugging me at the grocery store. So it still feels really abstract. To me, I'm just like, oh, I'm gonna do this job, right? You take on and you can't control how they're received in the world. You can't determine what's going to be successful or not. And the thing you love may not land or may not ever get seen. And then the thing that's like the most commercial thing, right? I sign more autographs for the Avengers than I sign for all of my other projects combined, and it will probably always be that way. And that will be my obituary. Well, maybe Ghostbusters. So I have my
It'll
obituary
be a big cut.
movies, and now the rest is just gravy, I guess. I'm not really answering your question. I no,
No,
I
that's
can't wrap
I
my head around
sometimes
it.
I try and lead people to ramble because
Yeah,
those are
you're
usually
doing
the more interesting answers, and you didn't you answered it by going where you wanted to, and that's what I want to hear.
it. Okay.
I before we wrap up here, I do want to touch a little bit. You mentioned going on to the next job. I do want to touch a little bit on the White Lotus
Yeah.
season 3. I know better than to ask for plot details and stuff like that. This is not my first rodeo, but I am curious. Since we're talking about acting, what specifically the White Lotus season 3 has added to your journey as an actor? What new thing did you experience, learn, touch upon specifically from this new season of the White Lotus?
Well, I always loved the show Enlightened. I own Chuck and Buck, so I've been a fan of Mike White's for a really long time. We had a meeting a number of years ago. I'm sure he doesn't even remember it. And he was one of the filmmakers I've always wanted to work with. So in that regard, it was a bucket list item for sure. And I love he has such compassion for every single character. like any good writer, they're all really him on some level. And he's one of those directors you come away believing he could play any of the characters better than whoever's playing them. One day we asked him, we were like, how does this person dance? Now do this person. Now do this person. And it was extraordinary to watch him channeling each of those characters. Um, so the real gift of it was working with Mike. He's a really special filmmaker. He's got a great sense of humor. He's very open. It's not so, rigid about, it's not that he's not, the language is good and you shouldn't change it. Don't go improvising around Mike White, but he's also throwing things at you and finding the humor and really selecting for performance. So you feel that if Mike says he got the thing he needs to build the scene, that he got it. And so that's a nice way to leave. You know that he's got everything, that you left it on the table, sufficient enough that Mike White can cut together a good episode of the White Lotus. But being on location is wild anyway. People get really unmoored. And we were in Thailand for 6 months and we were really far away from home. I mean, I did that longest flight in the world more times than I would like to count because I was commuting home to see my kids. And it's just a particular social experiment to be working on themes of death and spirituality in a Buddhist country with an international cast, just really, really far away from our lives. You're stepping out of the rhythm of your life to do this. And it was it's something I'll be processing for a long time. And I haven't
Absolutely.
had a lot of time because I was on the Gilded set 48 hours
Yeah,
later. So it was a really intense year in a good way.
absolutely. So before I let you go, I just want to ask one last question that I love asking actors because it's something I'm so interested in. It's that strange place right before somebody says action, like literally the second before you have to go into a scene. So
Yeah.
I'd like to ask, if you have any most memorable something that comes into your head when I say, the most memorable time right before they said action.
Oh my gosh. I suppose the first one that comes to mind, if I'm being honest, is the day on the leftovers when the family had been disappeared, or when the family had been replaced actually with the dolls, which is that big episode, chiefly because it was the longest I'd ever been on camera, was shooting episode 6. I hadn't had that much television experience. I mean, I had done Gone Girl at that point, so I'd gotten my movie school. But TV moves a lot faster than film. And so having to go through it at that pace was very hard. And that was one of those high pressure moments where you have to deliver this really major emotional reaction. And I just remember I was upstairs alone and I was reading Wave by Sonali Daryanagala. That was the book, the touchstone of, like the person who had the closest experience to having their entire family disappear. She lost her family in the tsunami. And I remember just like you could open that book to any passage and it would evoke whatever that feeling would be. And I just remember being alone with that book. And the thing that really struck me was that everybody was so respectful of that process. And the knowledge that when you have something like that you have to deliver on a set that's a good set, everybody is marshaling their focus for it. And I find that I just find that really moving every single time. That when there is like when somebody has a heavy lift and people care about the project, everybody puts their energy toward it, no matter what their job is. And I just find that really beautiful and cool. That's the thing I think of. I wish I had some really good blooper though, but that's
No, that's
yeah.
perfect. And it's a great place to wrap things up. Kai, I'm so glad we could do this. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. You're welcome anytime.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely.